Okay, Samuel, let's go ahead and take a look. Quite amount of symmetry and reference between the cap height and the x height. These stems are not Austrian. Now, let's go ahead and take a look. So here's your work right here. It's pretty good craft. I think you've got some good consistency in the shapes of your letter forms. I think you've also depicted these letter forms pretty realistically in terms of when. Well, let's go ahead and compare them to what we have here. And I think there's a couple of defining characteristics which are called optical relationships. And these are a little nuance between in the spacing and the mechanics of letter forms. So as we can see right here, one would take a look at this quickly and say, oh, wow, okay, those bowls are equal size, right? But a closer look reveals that the bowl on the lower is a little larger than the bowl on the top. And we can see that depicted in your typeface there. So that's a good job. I think you did a good job on your lowercase a's. Specifically, you are, and it looks like you're aware of and did render the variable stroke weight right here, meaning that this is thinner down here than it is thick. It's a lot thicker over here. We can see that in your lowercase a's. Not so much here, but this is a good lowercase a. I think that this lowercase a right here has the most accurate depiction of that open counter right there. But this one has the most accurate depiction of the bowl and the associated variable with strokes of that lowercase a. Okay, as far as craft goes, I think you're looking pretty good. Now, the assignment, of course, indicates that you're going to try to achieve normal letter spacing. What that typically translates to most students is that we're going to try to shoot for equal spacing between the letters. And that's fine. That's a good way to look at it. But upon closer examination, we see that these kind of optical relationships and these anatomical characteristics of different letter forms indicate that in order to maintain this illusion of equal distance or equal volume between letter forms, we may have to bring some closer together and some further apart to counter those optical illusions. And that is exactly the case, and that's exactly how kerning works. There is no universal kerning. Kerning is based on individual typefaces and individual combinations of letters. So if you were reading through this, and I've been mentioning this, and it's a good time to say this. You know what? When you're going through your work, I go ahead and view as many of the video tutorials as possible. You'll pick up quite a bit, and even when you're done viewing your tutorial, go ahead and view a few more, because there might be some things that are mentioned in other students' critiques that are applicable to yours. So you might as well, right? Okay, so that said, let's jump right over to watch your verticals. As you've mentioned, you're not sure if those are true verticals, and they don't seem to be. There's some inconsistencies there. That's okay. I mean, it's a tough exercise, especially if this is the first time you've done this. I still do this exercise when I'm in a situation where I have a client who wants to use a typeface in a project and I'm not familiar with the typeface. I will absolutely print out the letters and some of the words, and I'll trace them to develop this intimate relationship with the optical relationships associated with the letter form. So it's a very practical exercise for sure. Okay, so as I said, if you notice this, the instructions say, and this is something that a lot of students picked up on and did mention. If you didn't pick up on this, think about it now. But the instructions here say draw a baseline, a mean line, and a cap line. Now, if you found that to be an unusual statement or found that to be somewhat confusing based on this week's materials, you are exactly correct. And why is that the case? The case is that, or the reason that is the case is because you can draw the baseline, but you can't draw the mean line, you can't draw the mean line or the cap line unless the letter forms, a couple of the letter forms are in place. And that is because a mean line and a cap line are not universal. They're all dependent on the typeface you're using. Okay, so X height of letters are different depending on the typeface. So theoretically, what you want to do moving into your final rendition of this, draw the baseline first, all right? Then trace your cap B, then draw your cap line. Make sure those are perfectly parallel. There can be no fluctuation in that distance right there between the cap line and the baseline. Then trace out, determine your spacing, and I'll talk about spacing, optimal spacing in 1 second, but determine your spacing between the cap B and the first lowercase a. Mark that, get that in there in place. You might want to kind of draw and give yourself a little marker, and then you want to get that cap, that mean line established. Once you get your first marker for your mean line, take that distance and just make sure that that is a perfectly parallel line. The distance between the cap line and the mean line at the end should be the identical. So once those are perfectly parallel lines, then placement is going to be relatively easy. So that would be my recommendation, setting up your guidelines, baseline, mean line, cap line for the final submission. Now, generally what you want to do is, this is a general rule of thumb in kerning, okay? So if you have two curved letter, and this is for sans serif typeface, by the way, if you have two letter forms that are curved, that's going to be your closest kerning, okay? Then your next widest kerning is going to be between letter forms that have a curve and a straight, as we see here. Then your widest is going to be between two straight letter forms. And the reason has to do with volume. Kerning can be described as equal volume between letter forms. So what does equal volume mean? It means that if we were to imagine pouring a pitcher of water between this and this, they would fill up at the same time, right? Forget the counter of the O, of course. Well, I'm sorry, the open counter of the A, because once we got here, that would start to fill in, and it wouldn't. So let's just imagine there's just a line right there. Okay, so this distance right here should equal the same volume as this distance right here. Okay, so as we would just take the same amount of water to fill that as fill that. So theoretically, of course, it makes sense that since these are curved, we're going to pull these together. Since that area right there would have to get filled with water, these are straight, and they wouldn't. So those are going to be the widest. So again, that rule is the closest kerning is between two curved letter forms. Then the next widest kerning is between a curved and a straight, and then the widest kerning is going to be between two straights. Okay, now these should be, they shouldn't be noticeable. I mean, they should be pretty minor differences, but nonetheless, absolutely should be those rules of curved and straight letter forms will establish this illusion that there is equal volume between each and every letter. The relevance of this, of course, is that if we have good spacing in letters, the word reads beautifully. We see the word as a group. The mind perceives the word as a group. And then we can expand that to looking at sentences and paragraphs and pages of type. So if the spacing, the tracking, the letting, the kerning, the line space are all optimal, we've got optimal reading. We've got optimal legibility will make for optimal reading. So once we start getting unusual spaces, that all shuts down. The brain shuts down, doesn't see words as words, but rather sees words as series of letters. And that's what we don't want. Let me give you an example here. Your kerning right now is pretty loose, which is okay. It's fine. Let me look at some tighter kerning, an example. Okay, note how we can look at this word right here. We see it, and the eye just immediately goes, banana. It just registers, boom. We don't even have to think about it. Then we come to a word that's the same word, but it's more loosely kerned. In other words, there's wider spaces between the letters. The brain no longer sees this as a banana, but now we start to go B-A-N-A-N-A. It takes a little bit longer for the brain to really understand what's happening, as opposed to here, where I shouldn't say proper, because this is kerned too tightly. As I mentioned to Dakota, I think this is too tight, and I think yours is a much looser. So the example, the illustration I'm trying to draw out here is that optimal kerning will allow us to see words as words and not words as series of letters. Hope that makes sense. All right, so those would be my recommendations moving into your final submission. Samuel, if you have any questions at all, please let me know. But follow those guidelines. Take the Kerning Game too. This is introduced in week 2, but let's go ahead and introduce it a little earlier. It is type.method.ac, or a much easier way to remember this is just to go into Google and type in the Kerning Game, and you'll get this Kerning Game, and it's pretty self-explanatory. You just kind of pick your letters, and you can move the letters either manually or with your keyboard arrows, but you try to shoot for optimal kerning, and then you get to compare it to see how your kerning works with others, and I didn't do very well there. But go ahead and try that. I think that you'll really enjoy that. It's a good practice. And once you do that, go ahead and open your software and just kind of have the Kerning Game, your software, and your sketch open all at the same time, so you can kind of draw these compare and contrast and see how, just to get the most robust learning experience from this assignment. Okay, 9:54. Wow, almost 10 minutes. So sorry about that. I did not mean to take that long. But at any rate, if you have any questions at all, please let me know. Thank you, Samuel.